Well, hello, my friends. How's it going? Welcome to D4. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We crunch numbers about them, we theorycraft about them, not with the intent to tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential option for building and playing a character in-game in the hopes of creating something that is both really powerful, but also really fun to play. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build or play a certain kind of character, then welcome home. This is where you belong. I'm so glad you're here. I really am. So thanks for being here. And my name's Colby. I'll be your host. This is my 100th episode. I can't believe it. I really can't. I started this channel as a side project during that first COVID summer back in 2020. And while of course I really hoped that it would find an audience, I barely hoped to dream that, less than 2 years later, I'd be doing my 100th episode having just reached 50,000 subscribers. I can't tell you how grateful I am to all of you guys for helping me get there. I love you dearly. And I'm super excited to see where we're at after episode 200. Also, yes, just as a bit of housekeeping, having reached both of those fun and momentous milestones, I think I'm going to take a much needed break, go on a little vacation with my family. So I hope that you'll indulge me in a little R&R and not be too upset with the fact that there's not going to be a video next week. All right, enough of that. Let's jump in. If I were to ask you what the highest damage-dealing weapon was in D&D, what would you answer? The Greatsword? The Maul? Those have the highest damage dice at 2d6. What if we got to include, reasonably accessible magic weapons? I'm not talking about your legendary and artifact weapons that, take things to the next level, your Black Razors, your Moonblades, your Holy Avengers, but something that you might at least reasonably expect to be able to get in most campaigns at most tables, eventually. In that case, I'd maybe say it might be something like the Flame Tongue Greatsword, which would do 4d6 damage on a hit. That's impressive. Or on the other hand, maybe something like a +2 Maul or Greatsword, which might do a little less damage on a hit than a Flame Tongue, but thanks to that +2 to both hit and damage, you'd be doing a little more damage on average at higher enemy armor classes, right? In my opinion, none of those can outdo my favorite weapon in the game, the Shadow Blade. And since this is my 100th episode, I wanted to focus it on something that was very near and dear to my heart. And also maybe revisit something a little bit that kind of put me on the map for a lot of YouTube viewers who love D&D. The Shadow Blade is a Gish lover's dream. You cast a spell that lets you weave together threads of shadow to create a sword of solidified gloom in your hand. Such fantastic imagery. It's kind of like Wizards of the Coast looked into my brain and said, here's a guy who, above all else, wants to be both a dexterous sword user and sling spells. What if we gave him a sword that was a spell and made all of his dreams come true instantaneously? Oh, and also fulfilled his childhood fantasy of letting him fight with a purple lightsaber. It's just everything. Now, I have done lots and lots of builds on this channel that focused on building the best character I could around a specific weapon, from the dart to the whip to the dagger to most recently the throwing hammer, the light hammer. So for today, I thought, what better way to celebrate 100 episodes than by doing yet another build focused on trying to get the most out of a particular weapon, but also make it my favorite weapon and favorite spell in the game. I can't really think of a better way, so that's what I'm going to do today. And thus, I proudly present episode 100, The Shadow Blade. Huge thanks to my friend Randall Hampton, as always, who creates fantastic artwork for the character concepts that I send him each week. The quality of his artwork is always amazing. This is no exception, of course. If you would be interested in following Randall or potentially knowing how you might reach out to him to see if you could commission him for some art for your character or even your party, I will, as always, put links in the video description on how to do so. Thanks, Randall. And of course, before we jump into the build, I want to share another quick word about Roll for Combat's upcoming Kickstarter campaign for their new and really great Battlezoo books, as they are, again, the sponsor for the video this week. About a month ago, I introduced you guys to this Kickstarter. It consists of 3 books, the Battlezoo Bestiary Strange and Unusual book that will have over 150 award-winning monsters, new monster part rules, and more. I've been focusing mostly on the Battlezoo Eldamon book, which will give you a way to add collectible pets that you can evolve and battle, similar to, say, Pokemon, but for D&D or Pathfinder. Today, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the third component of this Kickstarter, which, by the way, launches on July 26th. I've been saying 19th, they pushed it back a week. And that is the Battlezoo Ancestries Year of Monsters, which will include new ancestries and races. Ancestries is the Pathfinder term, races D&D, right? For monsters, weapons, dungeons, and more. So here's how Year of Monsters is going to work. Once a month throughout all of 2023, Roll for Combat is going to release a new ancestry or race for your Pathfinder 2 or 5e game. These will be usable both as races that you can use for your own characters, or of course that you can use to create NPCs to populate your campaign with. So for example, sometime in January of 2023, one ancestry/race will be released both in PDF format and also as a Foundry VTT module to allow you to utilize it right away. Then in February 2023, another ancestry and race will be released similarly, both as PDF, Foundry VTT, and this will continue each and every month until December of 2023. Each race will be a minimum of 10 pages, some up to 40, giving you all kinds of details, background, information, stats, abilities, etc., etc. And then at the end of the year, they're going to release a compilation book that contains all of the ancestries, races, plus extras. The book will be released both as a PDF and a hardcover. Finally, in addition, everyone who orders Year of Monsters will automatically receive a Foundry VTT module that will contain all of the ancestries races that will automatically be updated every month with the latest monstrous ancestry/race. And again, this is just a part of the massive Kickstarter that's launching coming July 26th. So if any of it sounds interesting or fun at all, you should absolutely go to eldamon.com. Check the link down there and also in the video description, of course, and sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter launches if you're watching this before the 26th of July anyway. Roll for Combat puts out consistently high quality content, and I know that you guys will not be disappointed if you back this project, so go check them out. Big thanks to Roll for Combat, and let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1, for our starting race, we are going to go, surprising probably no one, with Wizard. Though there is a little multi-classing that I'd like to do on this character, I feel like we need to prioritize getting the Shadowblade spell as soon as possible, of course, since that's what we're building the character around. And yes, I do think that the spell works best in the hands of a wizard. So that's where we're starting. As for our race, I'm going to recommend that we go with the Shadar-kai, recently updated in MOM, the Monsters of the Multiverse. I wanted to be an elf or a half-elf on this character, for reasons I'm sure you can guess. So yeah, the Shadar-kai seemed like the absolute perfect choice for this character, both actually mechanically and even more so thematically. I think an Eldrin would have also been a good option. They work very similarly mechanically. A Drow half-elf would be nice, letting us gain some additional spells and an additional ability score bump, and still work nicely for thematic purposes, I think. But yes, for us, our character is going to be very focused on all things like dark and dim and shadowed. So when we first meet them, yeah, they are an elf of the Shadowfell, who has perhaps recently emerged into the material plane, existing, as we're told, in a strange state between life and death. Though they don't technically have like sunlight sensitivity or anything like that, which I'm grateful for. I think I probably would play this character as someone who like maybe shies away from bright light a little bit and tries to cling to the shadows and the shade whenever possible. Maybe get themselves some sunglasses. As elves, then, Shadar-kai get all the great elven features, like trance, dark vision, fey ancestry, etc. But unique to the Shadar-kai are two things. One, resistance to necrotic damage, which is not a bad type of damage to have resistance to. But even better, the blessing of the Raven Queen, which tells us that times proficiency bonus times per day. As a bonus action, we can magically teleport up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space that we can see. This works very similarly then to Misty Step, but importantly, it's not Misty Step. It's not a spell. So if we needed to, we could use this as a bonus action and then still use our action to cast a non-cantrip spell on our turn if we needed. Free teleportation is always fantastic and always useful, but in addition, after 3rd level, when we use this teleportation, we have resistance to all damage until the start of our next turn. And we get to appear ghostly and translucent. So cool. And really quite powerful for our survivability. As for ability scores, I always assume we're going the point buy method and would suggest taking a 15 in dexterity and our +2 from our racial there, a 15 in intelligence and a +1 there, and then a 13 wisdom and a 12 constitution. We're going to be prioritizing dexterity here for our Shadowblade weapon attacks, but of course, we are a wizard and we benefit a lot from intelligence as well. We need wisdom for the multiclassing that we're going to do. See if you can guess. And of course, everyone needs Constitution. I regret that we only had enough for a 12 in our Constitution, but them's the breaks. As for equipment, I would recommend going the gold buy route and picking up some studded leather, a short sword, and then of course your spell book and any other necessities you may have. You can't actually use the armor or the weapon currently, but that will change soon. For now, just I would say rely on your cantrips for the most part in your spells when you're in combat. And speaking of spells, of course, we get cantrips, first level spells. I would say, obviously there's a lot of fantastic ones to consider. At this level, I would for sure pick up Sleep, though I wouldn't plan on using it much past the first couple of levels, but it's really potent for control in those early levels. Things I would plan on using throughout my career would be Booming Blade and or Green Flame Blade, though we really won't get a lot of use out of it for a few levels. These, of course, let you make a weapon attack as part of casting the spell, and then doing some additional damage on the hit once you're past level 5 at least, plus some additional damage depending on the situation. We'll talk more about these spells later. I'd also pick up Shield and Absorb Elements for some nice additional defense on reaction options, and maybe Mage Armor. Right now at this level, since we're not wearing any armor, it's pretty useful giving us a 13 armor class plus our dexterity modifier, so we'd be at a 16 right now with Mage Armor. But next level, we might not want to spend a spell slot on it. We'll discuss in a sec. I also would make sure to grab Find Familiar, both for scouting and utility purposes, as well as, of course, to give you advantage on at least one attack that you make per turn, since, of course, our Familiar can take the help action and thereby grant us advantage, right? At level 2, as a wizard, we get to pick up our Arcane Tradition, our subclass, and we are, of course, going with Blade Singing. See, about a year and a half ago, as most of you no doubt know, I put out what I called at the time my Bladesinger 2.0 video. And I guess it'll probably always be my most viewed video. But there's a couple of issues with that build that have been bugging me. First off, of course, as some of you will recall, I tried to pull off the old I'm a custom lineage elf trick that fortunately Jeremy Crawford finally gave us a ruling on in the negative, thanks to some of you flooding his Twitter feed asking him to give us a definitive answer. Thanks again for that, even if I was a little disappointed by the ruling. Doing that was a way for me to try and sneakily get a free feat at level 1 and make it Elven Accuracy, right? So that doesn't really work rules as written. I kind of knew it, but I just kept hoping. Anyway, second of all, in that Bladesinger 2.0 video, I make some assumptions about things like maybe not needing Warcaster, that I sort of changed my mind on, maybe not being able to use Shadow Blade and Booming Blade together, which I've also kind of changed my mind on, actually. Assuming that we were always going to be in dim light or darkness, which is a really tough assumption to make. So yeah, I've had a lot of requests from you guys to do like a Bladesinger 3.0 video and update things accordingly. I suppose you could probably consider this to be that if you wanted, though to be fair, with the commitment that I'm taking on this character to really focus on the Shadow Blade, it might just be more of an, like, in the name of character and concept, I will unnecessarily restrain myself version of Bladesinger 3.0. But as a Bladesinger, of course, we get a couple great features. First up, training in War and Song. This tells us that we can have proficiency in one martial weapon of our choice. I'd pick the short sword, potentially the scimitar if you prefer, though it's really just kind of a flavor thing more than anything. And at this level, I would plan on dual wielding short swords or scimitars, so hopefully you can pick another one up. And then we also get proficiency in light armor, so we can equip our studded leather now. Unless, of course, you plan on constantly trying to maintain mage armor, but the difference now is only 1 AC, so not sure if it's worth a spell slot. As for your weapons, no, we're not going to plan on getting two-weapon fighting on this character, so the damage from that offhand bonus action attack isn't going to be great, at least right now. And really the reason is because it's a pretty significant investment to pick up that fighting style, whether via a feat or maybe like a one-level fighter dip, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. You know, Constitution saving throw proficiency, more armor and weapon proficiencies, and the fighting style are all pretty nice things, but I just hate delaying my important Bladesinger features more than I have to, and so I opt to not start that route. You might want to consider starting as a fighter before taking wizard levels. But really, also, the character is going to be pretty bonus action heavy, so there will typically be a round or two at the beginning of every combat where we're not going to have use of our bonus action to make that offhand weapon attack. So investing in order to get a little more damage out of it just felt like not super great to me. But then of course we also get the blade song feature, which is the thing that makes a blade singer. As a quick reminder, this tells us that times with a bonus action, again, we can begin our blade song. And then for the next minute, so long as we don't wear medium or heavy armor, use two hands to make a weapon attack, or use a shield, we get a bump to our armor class and concentration checks equal to our intelligence modifier, so 3. We have an extra 10 feet of move speed, and we get advantage on acrobatics checks. This means that our current armor class is an 18 while Bladesong is active, and we're wearing studded leather. 19 if we're using mage armor, right? And then of course a 23 or 24 if we have the shield spell active. For a level 2 character, that's pretty fantastic. At level 3, we get second level wizard spells. There are plenty of great ones for wizards to consider, of course, but as a blade singer, I think I'm most interested in Misty Step, of course, though it's slightly less important for us as a Shadowkai. Mirror Image is a really good spell, I think, at least at early and mid levels, letting us, without concentration, conjure 3 illusory images of ourselves that our enemies might hit instead of us. I do feel like this spell loses usefulness later on as we become increasingly difficult to hit, but our images remain fairly easy to hit, meaning that our enemies are often hitting and destroying them when they would have missed us, right? But, of course, the most important spell for us here is the one that we are building our character around, my beloved Shadowblade. So, as far as mechanics go, Shadowblade costs a bonus action as well to cast, lasts for a minute with our concentration, and the sword it creates is a simple melee weapon that you're proficient with, and also has the finesse, light, and thrown properties, so we can use our dexterity to make attacks with it, right? It does 2d8 psychic damage on a hit, which, as a reminder, is more than any other non-magical, non-futuristic weapon in the game. Can be thrown or dropped and then resummoned into your hand as a bonus action, something that we made great use of in my Bladesinger Nova build from about a year ago or so, which I actually was pretty proud of. And, importantly, if you attack with it while you're in dim light or darkness, then you have advantage. Now, unlike past Bladesinger builds that I've done, I'm not going to just assume that we're always fighting in dim light or darkness and thus have advantage when I crunch the numbers. I know I always claim to crunch numbers for best case scenarios, but I'm just not sure that's a particularly valuable or useful assumption in this case, because unlike a lot of assumptions that I make about best case scenarios, this is just one that we have very little control over, unless we specifically try to do something about it, which we will later. Sometimes, sure, you're fighting at night or in a dimly lit dungeon or something, but for most of us, in most campaigns, we will very often be fighting in bright light. I mean, even a torch sheds bright light in a 20-foot radius. I just don't really feel great about making that assumption any longer. And so, for now, I'm only going to assume that we have advantage on one of our attacks per turn, thanks to our familiar. At level 4, we get our first ability score increase or feat. And since we're going to be dual wielding, and our hands are full of weapons, we probably just have to grit our teeth and pay the Warcaster tax here, I think, and I hate it. I mean, you could just say, I'm just going to use my Shadowblade. Without the 2-weapon fighting style, and considering that we need a bonus action to both start our Blade Song and summon our Shadowblade, I'm not going to be getting that many attacks with my offhand weapon anyway. The problem is, in a couple of levels, I think most of us at most tables are really going to be wanting to make an attack with that short sword in our offhand, in addition to our Shadowblade, as often as we can anyway. I'll explain why when we get there. But in preparation for that, I think we got to take Warcaster here to make sure that we can cast spells that have somatic and material components, even with our hands full of weapons. And of course, there are some nice additional perks to the feat, primarily that we get advantage on our concentration checks, meaning with this and our Blade Song active, we should have a pretty easy time maintaining our concentration for the most part. Also, when we get to make an opportunity attack, we can cast a spell instead of making a weapon attack, and that means, sure, you could throw out like a big damage spell or something as long as it just targets one creature, but it also means that you could potentially cast Booming Blade as an opportunity attack, and since your enemy is moving, that's what triggered the opportunity attack in the first place, right? They should also trigger the additional damage that Booming Blade does when a creature who has been hit by it moves. I appreciate that a few DMs may decide, I'm going to have my enemy stop moving as soon as you hit them with Booming Blade, so as to not trigger that damage, but that is lame. Bad DM. Alright, at level 5, we get 3rd level wizard spells, of course, and all of the usuals should be considered and used when the situation calls for it. Fireball, Counterspell, Tiny Hut, and yes, potentially even concentration-based things like Fear and Hypnotic Pattern and Slow. Of course, I'm going to assume that we're using our concentration for Shadow Blade and upcasting it here with the 3rd level spell so that it does 3d8 damage per hit, which is fantastic. That's almost as much as a Flame Tongue Greatsword now, and we're 5th level. Also keep in mind that at 5th level now, Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade do an additional 1d8 damage when you make your weapon attack with them. But since the description of these spells specifically state that they have a material component that is a melee weapon worth at least 1 silver, at most tables, and rules as written, don't think Shadow Blade qualifies for that 1 silver piece requirement. Thus, most of us aren't going to be able to use Shadow Blade to make a Booming Blade attack. And believe me, I've heard all of the arguments for why it should work. A scroll of Shadow Blade costs money. If you were to inscribe the spell into your spellbook, it would cost money, etc., etc. Feel free to tell me your favorite reasons why it actually does work, rules as written, in the comments. I know that a lot of you can use Shadow Blade to cast Booming Blade, and for those of you, congratulations. For everyone else, I'm going to assume that we have to cast Booming Blade using our short sword. And that's going to mean doing less damage when we use Booming Blade than we otherwise would. But yeah, generally speaking, on our action, for this level, I'm not assuming that we're going to be using Booming Blade while we're making attacks. Just action, Shadow Blade, bonus action, short sword, right? But at the next level, we're level 6. And that means we get extra attack. And of course, as a Blade Singer, we get an extra attack. Because we can cast a cantrip with our second attack instead of making a second weapon attack. And while sure, there's plenty of cool stuff that we could potentially do with that cantrip, like, say, casting Blade Ward like I did in my Blade Singer tank video, I'm going to assume that now we will be casting Booming Blade. And yes, so far as I can tell, at the vast majority of tables, and I think rules as written, even if you can't cast Booming Blade with Shadow Blade, you could take the attack action, make an attack with your Shadow Blade, then, as a cantrip for your second attack with your short sword and use Booming Blade. It never tells us in the extra attack feature that both attacks made have to be with the same weapon in the same hand, right? And then, as a bonus action, make an attack again with your Shadow Blade. For those of you who might be scratching your head here or calling foul, here are the rules regarding two-weapon fighting. When you take the attack action and attack with a light melee weapon that you're holding in one hand, you can use a bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon that you're holding in the other hand. We made an attack with Shadow Blade, then cast Booming Blade with our short sword that we're holding in our other hand, and nothing tells us that we can't do that. So there shouldn't be anything but a surly DM, I think, preventing us from then making a bonus action attack with our Shadow Blade that we're holding in our other hand. I appreciate that some of you may disagree with this, and I'm happy to hear your arguments in the comments. But just know that, so far as I can tell, the vast majority of tables rule it this way. Now, no, we wouldn't be able to add our dexterity modifier to the damage of that bonus action Shadow Blade attack. But, of course, in that case, we did get to add it to the Booming Blade attack that we made with our short sword, so it's kind of a wash. Alright, at level 6, it's time for our first damage report. So let's just go over what combat might look like for us currently. As my friend Chris over at Tree Up Monk's Temple has pointed out, using Shadow Blade on a Blade Singer can definitely be a little problematic in that it takes a minute to get things ramped up, right? Since, like I've said, both Shadowblade and Bladesong take a bonus action to get going. When I play Blade Singers in game, I will usually start my Bladesong on round 1 and then cast a spell like Mirror Image for some extra defense, or maybe even throw out a fireball or something to sort of soften up the enemies on the battlefield. That's actually my favorite tactic if I've got the spell slot for it. And yeah, I really don't find it to feel particularly limiting or painful in any way, personally. In fact, it makes me feel really awesome, tossing out a really cool spell right in round 1 as I'm kind of warming up, doing my stretches. And then just jumping in on round 2 to make attacks, right? Round 2, bonus action, summon your Shadowblade and make a couple of weapon attacks. And then, yes, on round 3 is when you're getting your full rotation, making 2 attacks with your Shadowblade, upcast at the 3rd level, and getting a Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade attack in with your short sword. Assuming that full rotation at that point, you'd be doing 3d8 times 2 for Shadowblade, 1d6 plus 1d8 for short sword plus Booming Blade, right? Plus 6 for our dexterity modifier on 2 of those attacks, 3 each. And yeah, I'm only going to assume for now that you have advantage on one of those attacks thanks to your familiar. But, of course, if you're fighting in dim light or darkness, these numbers are going to be a little bit higher. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 39 DPR. And against an enemy with a 15 armor class, we would do 31 DPR. And at this level then, compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date, check the video description to see those graphs and spreadsheets, we are kind of upper tier 2 compared to the other builds. We'd be in a much better place if we could have skipped Warcaster, or if we were fighting in dim light or darkness, of course, but it's still pretty decent, and it's going to get better. At level 7, like I've said, I have a really hard time multiclassing out of Bladesinger. Getting higher level spells and spell slots is such a huge deal on this character, and I really hate to delay our ability score increases and feats, not to mention the really fabulous Song of Victory, but on this character, focused on the Shadowblade, I really want to do something that can help us ensure a reliable way to have dim light or darkness. And thus, in this case, I think it worth sacrificing a couple of levels in order to do so right now, since we've now secured both the Shadowblade spell and our very valuable extra attack. And so, we are going to do the unthinkable. Take a couple of levels in Twilight Cleric. I know. Many of you find the subclass to be distastefully overpowered. It doesn't actually bother me quite as much, and we're really just here for one main thing. But yeah, for us, for me anyway, this elf from the Shadowfell, keeps to the dark and strikes with a shadowy blade, happens to be a believer. It could be that they're a follower simply of the Raven Queen, but they don't have to be. Perhaps they left the Shadowfell in the first place to sort of escape her clutches, after discovering a kinder, more soothing and gentler deity of the night and the dark, like Helm or Celestian, who has shown them that darkness might not necessarily mean fear, death, or despair, but can instead be restful and comforting. Perhaps you're even just learning this right now at this point in your character's story, and you suddenly are wishing to devote yourself to this deity to learn more, or receive assistance in leaving behind your more sinister tie to the darkness. Whatever your reasons, yes, we're taking cleric levels now. And one thing I definitely wanted to be sure of when deciding whether or not to multiclass for this particular character, especially, was to make sure that I didn't sacrifice spell slot progression with any multiclassing. Most of our damage is going to be coming from Shadowblade, it's what we're building around, and if we delay our ability to upcast Shadowblade, it really is going to hurt our damage. So I'm happy to remind you that since clerics are full casters, this means that we do now at this level have 4th level spell slots, even though we only have 3rd level wizard spells. But as a cleric, at level 1, we get our Divine Domain, our subclass, and yes, we're taking Twilight. And honestly, despite claims of the subclass being overpowered, it's, if nothing else, a perfect fit for this Shadar-Kai Shadowblade who loves the darkness. So thematically, I love it. We also get martial weapon and heavy armor proficiency, not that we really needed it, but it is nice to know that if we do find, say, like a really great magic scimitar or something, we will now have the option to use it. And as a Twilight Cleric, we get a couple of strong features here. We get Eyes of Night. This gives us dark vision up to 300 feet, which is pretty crazy. But honestly, I can't really think of a single time in any D&D campaign that I've ever played where the dark vision I had on my character was insufficient. And if only I had up to 300 feet of dark vision, then I could have prevented some crazy crisis, right? I don't know. Maybe it's happened to you. More powerfully, though, with this feature, we can share the dark vision that is granted us here with wisdom modifier number of creatures. That's only one for us within 10 feet of us, and that dark vision that we share lasts for an hour. We can only do it once per day, but then we could spend a spell slot to do it more. Again, this is really nice. I just don't feel like it's particularly game-breaking. Most player characters have dark vision these days, so that one human in your party is really going to thank you. I don't know, maybe more people are playing humans and other non-dark vision races than I realize. But we also do get Vigilant Blessing, and this tells us that as an action, you can touch a creature, including yourself, stop touching yourself, and give them advantage on their next initiative roll. There's no limit to how often you can use this, but it only works on one creature at a time. So this potentially means advantage on all of our initiative rolls so long as we always remember to touch ourselves. That's really nice. Winning initiative is super important, especially for us, as we are going to require a little ramp up time before we're firing on all cylinders, right? And we do get some cleric spells and cantrips here, of course, too. I definitely go for like the usual suspects: guidance, healing word, cure wounds, and probably even bless. You know, if for some reason Shadowblade wasn't going to be effective in a fight, or you were all out of your second level spells and higher, it's a great use of our concentration to buff multiple party members with a d4 on all of their attacks and saving throws. It's good for the whole game. But at level 8, we would be a Cleric 2, and all Clerics at level 2 get Channel Divinity, which can be used once per short rest to either turn undead or something else based on your subclass. With Turn Undead, of course, as an action, any undead within 30 feet of us have to make a Wisdom saving throw, or they're turned for 1 minute, which means that they have to spend their turn running away from us. But as the second option for our Channel Divinity, as a Twilight Cleric, we get Twilight Sanctuary. And yeah, this is the main reason that we're here. With Twilight Sanctuary, as an action, you can emanate a sphere of twilight from you within a 30-foot radius. That's pretty big. It lasts for a minute. It moves with you and is filled with dim light. The implications thus for our Shadowblade, of course, are obvious, since if we're in dim light or darkness, we can make attacks with our Shadowblade with advantage. Now, some of you may be wondering, if you're in an area of bright light and you use this, does it change the lighting in that 30-foot area to dim light? What if someone casts the light spell within the 30-foot radius after you've already activated it, etc., etc.? I'm just going to assume that because the ability specifies that you are filling the area with dim light, it essentially is going to cancel out or cover up any bright light effects, torches, etc. that may be in the area already. That said, I would 100% discuss this with your DM before you go down this path to make sure that it's going to work at your table like you want it to. Now, the dim light thing is really great for us, of course, but the real power of the ability, and the thing that people complain about so much, is that once Twilight Sanctuary is active, once per turn, you can grant any creature who ends their turn in the fairly massive 30-foot radius, including yourself, either 1d6 plus your cleric level in temporary hit points, so 5.5 temporary hit points on average, or you can end the frightened or charmed condition on a creature. Alright, to be fair, this is a really strong ability. Probably is a little overpowered. The temporary hit points alone are going to overshadow just about any other source of temporary hit points that any other party member might be trying to provide. Just compare it to the shaman build, the support barbarian that we did a couple of weeks ago, right? Yeah, 5.5 temporary hit points every single round without you having to, spend any additional resources, bonus action, reaction, anything like that. To grant them is really great. And then on top of that, the ability to end charmed or feared is also really strong when you need it. That said, we can only use this once per short rest, and it does take an action to use, so these things temper it somewhat. It also ends if you're incapacitated, so if you get stunned or paralyzed, it's done, though doesn't require concentration. I mean, if your DM is uncomfortable with the power level of this ability, I would say work with it to temper its power until the point that they are comfortable. Maybe you get rid of the charmed or frightened bit. Maybe you reduce the size of the aura, or the amount of temporary hit points that it grants. I'm sure you could come up with something that you're both happy with. We're mostly here for the dim light anyway, but if that's all that we're providing, it would be hard to justify taking a 2-level multi-class dip just for a once per short rest sphere of dim light that lasts a minute. So I'm really glad that we get the other benefits as well, and it really gives us a lot of additional versatility and support functionality that we didn't really have before, so that's nice. But at level 9, with our advantage-inducing dim light secure, I think it's time to return to our wizardly ways, and I would personally plan on just staying wizard for the rest of our career. Thus, as a wizard 7, we would get 4th level spells. Lots of great ones, of course, but most of the best ones, like Polymorph and Wall of Fire, require concentration. So I'd say, pick your favorites, but maybe focus on the great non-combat, non-concentration options like Dimension Door, for example. More importantly, for us, at this level, we do have 5th level spell slots now, which means that we could upcast Shadowblade to do 4d8 damage on a hit. And that's exactly what I'm going to assume that we're doing with our 5th level spell slot when I crunch numbers in the next damage report, which is now. So since we last checked, our Shadowblade has gone up by 1d8 in damage, and we've gained a nice way to give ourselves reliable advantage on those Shadowblade attacks, even if it is only for 1 minute per day. In case you're wondering when you should use Twilight Sanctuary, I would follow this simple guide. If you're in bright light, use it. If you're in dim light or darkness, don't use it. If you're in bright light and you've already used it, then be sad. It's pretty straightforward, but yes, on round 1 now, we're probably starting off with Bladesong and then activating our Twilight Sanctuary, if we're going to be using it. Then on round 2, cast Shadowblade and make your attacks. And of course on round 3, you're going full tilt. I am going to assume that we do have advantage on all of our attacks now going forward, even on our short sword booming blade attack, since we do have our familiar that can give us advantage on 1 attack per turn. Maybe clear this with your DM to make sure that your familiar can basically give you advantage on the attack that you want it to give you advantage on. Most tables seem to allow this, but some can be sticklers on which attack specifically the familiar is giving advantage on. Anyway, assuming all of the above, against an enemy with a 10 armor class at this level, we would do 54 DPR on average. And against an enemy with a 16 armor class, it would be 46 DPR. Compared to other sustained damage builds at this level, that puts us more like upper tier 2, lower tier 1 by comparison. So we've gained a little bit of ground since last check, and again, it's going to just keep getting better. At level 10, we would be a Wizard 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat, and finally, that means we get to take Elven Accuracy here. And I hated waiting this long to get this feat. I am really grateful that at my table, I can take custom lineage and be like a half-elf, half-dwarf, like my current character in our Tales of Veneria campaign, Ceradon, is, and thus qualify for this feat and take it right at level 1. You might think that's overpowered. But yeah, especially since we really kind of needed Warcaster, it just feels so late to be picking up this feat. But anyway, we're here at last, and we're very happy about that. Because, as you probably know, with Elven Accuracy, we get to bump either our Intelligence, Wisdom, Dexterity, or Charisma by 1. We would, of course, bump Dexterity, taking it from a 17 to a nice 18 now. And then, when we make attacks with one of those ability scores, and we have advantage, we get to basically roll 3 d20s instead of 2. And that means really great things for our damage numbers, especially at higher enemy armor classes. At level 11, we would be a Wizard 9. And that means 5th level spells. 5th level spells are amazing. Most of the best ones, again, require concentration. Your Big Beast Hand, your Animate Objects, Cloud Kill, Hold Monster, and of course the almighty Wall of Force. Something to keep in mind here. If you don't help the other players at your table manage their expectations for what you are going to be doing in combat, they could be a little bit annoyed with you here for wasting your concentration on Shadowblade, when you could be locking down a couple of enemies behind a wall of force or something, or paralyzing a really powerful creature with Hold Monster, right? I talked about this in my Bladesinger Monk video a few weeks ago, and actually in the little short that I did that came out right before it. But my approach with this character, and frankly all of my Bladesingers and Gish builds in general, tends to be this. I don't really think of them as full casters, or at least not in the same way that you would think of another full caster subclass. They have the capacity to be one, sure, but I think of them as a Gish for a reason, right? I'm a melee damage dealer first, and a wizard second. That's me. That's fun for me, and also really powerful. So instead of, playing a character here who should be seeking to control the battlefield first and do damage second, I'm a character who deals damage first, akin to like a barbarian or a fighter, but who brings a boatload of utility and damage options along with them via my many spells. So yeah, for me, I'm focusing here on things like Synaptic Static, which is way better to start a fight with than a Fireball, as it does comparable damage, but then has the fantastic additional benefit of forcing enemies who fail their intelligence saving throw against it to subtract 1d6 from their attack rolls and ability and concentration checks. That's amazing. Maybe Steel Wind Strike, that can both teleport you and do 6d10 damage on up to 5 creatures. For the record, I probably only use that if I need to do both damage and teleport with a single spell slot. It's a fun spell, but the multi-target damage isn't that much better than Synaptic Static, though of course it is easier to hit more targets with it without hitting your friends, so, worth considering. Telepathic Bond might be a must-have here, I think, since it can be cast as a ritual, meaning no spell slots expended, and then just gives your entire party the ability to communicate telepathically with each other for an hour. Super useful. Scrying can be really useful, Transmute Rock. There are so many great spells that you can still use as a 9th level wizard without needing to use your concentration. But again, just make sure to discuss your plans with your party beforehand so they're not expecting you to be focusing on battlefield control when a fight breaks out. And maybe somebody else could then take that role if they wanted. Or, of course, feel free to throw out Wall of Force if you want to enjoy the flexibility and versatility of being able to do both. Maybe especially if you're like fighting in bright light and you've already used your Channel Divinity, right? That's what's so amazing about being a Bladesinger. So many fun and powerful options. You will never get bored. That's a Colby guarantee. Do remember also that we get 6th level spell slots here, even though we don't get additional benefits from upcasting Shadowblade at the 6th level. It's still nice to have another spell slot to cast it with if we need to, assuming we have multiple combats in a day, or of course to use on Synaptic Static, etc. Finally, now that we're level 11, Booming Blade does 2d8 damage on a hit, and 3d8 if they move. At level 12, we would be a Wizard 10, and we get Song of Defense as a Bladesinger. This feature is a little bit lackluster, I think. With Song of Defense, when you take damage, you can use your reaction and a spell slot to reduce the damage that you took by 5 times the spell slot level that you expended. So, sure. If it's damage that, say, wouldn't have been affected by the Absorb Element spell, or it's an attack roll against you that's so high that your shield spell isn't going to help, maybe especially if it was a critical hit, you might want to consider using this. But I would probably only use it if it were the difference between going unconscious or not. And even then I might think twice, since it only works on that one instance of damage, right? And if you barely stay alive by using it, you've expended potentially a high-level spell slot, and you still might go unconscious before your turn comes up or you get healed anyway. At level 13, we would be a Wizard 11, and we get 6th level spells. Contingency can be a huge game-changing lifesaver. Chain Lightning is a really fun and potent multi-target spell. Disintegrate is potentially powerful and useful, but I feel like you kind of have to take Mass Suggestion here, as it can single-handedly just kind of end a combat encounter, as you suggest to your enemies that they, go home or go dig a hole or whatever. And it doesn't require concentration. But then again, we haven't been focusing on bumping our intelligence, and while it is at a 16, there's a decent likelihood now here that several enemies are going to make their save against something like a Mass Suggestion. So you might prefer to take a spell that's not going to be saving throw dependent, or at least that can still be effective if the enemies make their saving throw. Anyway, whichever spell you pick, have fun with it. We do now get 7th level spell slots thanks to multiclassing, which means that we can upcast Shadowblade to do 5d8 on a hit just in time for our next damage report. So, once again, since last we checked, our Shadowblade has increased by another d8 of damage, though sadly, it is capped now at 5d8. Our Booming Blade, or Green Flame Blade, has also increased by 1d8, and we've picked up triple advantage with Elven Accuracy and bumped our Dex modifier, finally. In addition to picking up all kinds of great multi-target damage and utility and control spells along the way. We are truly living our best Shadowblade life at the moment. And so, against an enemy here with a 10 armor class, we would do 74 damage per round on average, and against an enemy with a 17 armor class, it would be 71 DPR. I love elven accuracy. That damage curve just gets so much flatter as the enemy AC gets higher. It's gorgeous. Flat curves on a graph? Is it getting hot in here? Compared to other sustained damage builds at this level, we're pretty comfortably like in the bottom half of tier 1 now. At level 14, we would be a wizard 12 and we get another ability score increase or feat, and that means we finally get to cap our dexterity at 20. I'm really sad it took us this long, but I'm really happy to finally be here. At level 15, we'd be a wizard 13, and that means 7th level spells. Plenty of useful non-concentration options, of course, that your party would love to have, like teleport, for example. But I think you kind of have to take Force Cage here for like a souped up version of Wall of Force, but that doesn't require concentration. We do get 8th level spell slots here as well. That's basically for us probably going to mean another casting of our max level Shadow Blade, or, another use of Force Cage or Mass Suggestion or an upcast Synaptic Static even. At level 16, we would be a wizard 14, and we get Song of Victory. I was very glad to at least get here finally. I love this feature a lot. I'm sad that we won't be able to, by 17 anyway, bump our intelligence to benefit more from it. But for what it's worth, I really hope you can find like a headband of intellect on this character fairly early on in your career, since of course it would bump not only our spell save DC, but also for us, our armor class, our concentration checks, and now our damage, as with Song of Victory, we get to add our intelligence modifier to the damage of all of our melee weapon attacks while our Blade Song is active. Yes, both on our Shadow Blade attacks and our Short Sword attacks. So, hooray for damage. And finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a wizard 15. This means 8th level spells. I'm going to say pick your favorite. Lots of powerful and fun ones. None that I would plan on using really in combat. So yeah, knock yourself out. And then we do get 9th level spell slots here, but alas, like I've said, no benefit to Shadow Blade by upcasting it at 9th level, which seems really odd to me, actually, since it scales every 2 levels otherwise. Maybe Wizards of the Coast just figured there's no way that anybody would be stupid enough to spend a 9th level spell slot on Shadow Blade. Alas, they have vastly underestimated my stupidity. Still, having that additional spell slot for everything else that we want to be casting here is nice. Finally, Booming Blade gets its last upgrade to do 3d8 damage on a hit and 4d8 if they move. For our final damage report then, the big changes since last check are that we've capped our dexterity, gotten another d8 of damage out of Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, and now get to add our intelligence modifier to all 3 of our weapon attacks. Again, with some nice utility and control arrows added to our quiver. But against an enemy with a 10 armor class here, we would do on average 90 DPR. And against an enemy with an 18 armor class, it would be just a little bit less at 88. And compared to other sustained damage builds at this level, we have slipped a skosh back down to like upper half of tier 2. All right, final thoughts. When you take the damage that we do at all armor classes that we account for at each of the damage reports that we reported on, it gives us a tier score here of 58, putting them very near the top of tier 2, just ahead of the Swashbuckler and below the Eldritch Blade Master. And you know what? That's really pretty solid damage. And I love that we were able to get there just by relying on my darling baby Shadowblade the whole time. Now, one thing that we haven't really talked about much this far, but that bears mentioning, part of the reason that Shadowblade doesn't fare as well in actual gameplay compared to other weapons is not only does it require a concentration and take a bonus action to summon, but magic weapons exist in D&D. Meaning that, especially at higher character levels, your Shadowblade might do more damage if it hits, but you might be giving up a higher hit chance and some potentially other cool and powerful effects by staying committed to the Shadowblade, right? If it were me playing this character, I think I would try to talk to my DM and let them know what I was trying to do with my character, and considering the sacrifices of having to use a bonus action, a spell slot, and your concentration all of the time for my weapon, I'd see if they wouldn't maybe be willing to let my special Shadowblade, that's such an important part of my character concept, grow with me a little bit as I hit certain character milestones, in addition to the additional damage it does when I upcast it. Maybe even something as little as like a +1 to hit and damage if you use it as a 4th level spell or above, and then a +2 as a 6th level spell and above, something like that. But even if we can't get that, thanks to the reliable advantage that we have, and especially after we get Elven Accuracy, our hit chance and damage output with it is still quite nice, and I love it. And hey, we still make really great use of a magical short sword or a scimitar, not to mention like saving our magic item brownie points and attunement slots for things like some really nice magic studded leather, or a cloak of protection, or a headband of intellect, etc., etc. But of course, the best part of this character is not just the cool damage that we get to do, but the fact that we have so much more that we bring to the table as a wizard in the form of utility, control, and like area of effect damage. And we barely even discussed, really, the pretty nice support that we bring with a simple 2-level Twilight Cleric dip. In the end, what we've done is create a character that ends up being really quite well-rounded and incredibly versatile. And I think for all of those reasons, the next time I play a Bladesinger in-game, I just might follow this path. But anyway, that's the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you know how much I love you. Thanks for watching and for subscribing and liking and commenting and even considering joining the channel. Big thanks to all of my channel members. I hope you'll check out the other content that's available on the channel if you're not in the habit of doing so. But much more importantly, I hope that you have a great day and a fantastic week, and that you stay safe and be kind and good, and that I see you again really soon. 2 weeks. All right, until then, take care. Bye. Angels, answer me. Are you near if rain should fall? Am I to believe you will rise to calm the storm? For so great a treasure words will never do. Surely, if this is, promises are mine to give you, mine to give. For some reason, I always sing Enya whenever I'm blade singing. Even though technically the blade is the thing that's supposed to be singing, I think. I don't know. I can't help it. My character just wants to burst into song. Maybe I harmonize with the blade. Sheesh. 1 paragraph in and I'm getting teary-eyed. It's okay. Speedy delivery. Actually, don't say that yet. Booming blade with the other hand. Well. Okay. Do say that. Well, don't say that yet. Compared to other sustained damage builds at this level, we're now pretty comfortable in like the bottom half of tier 1 by comparison. I already said by comparison. I already said compared to.